For today's original video, I actually planned to show you how to turn one of these old solid wood doors into this beautiful conversation piece that is a farmhouse style coffee table. However, one thing that you'll find if you take on this project yourself is that based on the design of the old door, you may be limited to the proportions at the top and the sides of the table and may have to change the overall design. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take the top square of this door, turn it into the top of the side table that we'll be making instead of a coffee table. We're going to take the bottom half of the door, turn that into the legs. We're going to do our best to keep and incorporate the hinges in the door handle just to make it interesting, and with a little bit of inspiration from our friend right here. We're also going to be adding in a doghouse / dog bed feature to the door. The reason you have to be considerate of the original design and layout of the inlays of your door is that these sections right here are what I would consider floating. What I mean by that is this is actually a very thin piece of wood, and the only thing holding it in place are these channels, these grooves that are cut into the solid wood sections hold and lock this in place. So with that being said, you have to think, if you were to design your door and make a cut straight across this inlay, there'd be nothing holding that bottom section in, and it essentially could just slide out and wouldn't be very supportive. So what you have to do is you have to take a step back. You want to look at the overall design and shape of your door. As I had mentioned, for this project, we're going to take this top square of the door here and use that as our table. So what we would want to do is we would actually make our cut along here, and that way we're keeping the solid wood perimeter. You're going to want to find yourself something to prop the door up for the cut so the blade doesn't hit the ground and is able to fully clear the door. I found myself 2 tires. After that, we're going to go ahead, take our square and mark the lines where our first cut is going to go. After that, I want to make sure that everything is symmetrical, so I measure that this side is 4 5/8 inches. I come down to the top end of the door and we notice that it's 4 7/8 inches. So that's going to need to be trimmed. So I'm going to take the square again, mark a new line, and then we're going to go ahead and take our saw, make the first cut, and then shave off the second end to make sure again that that top for our table is going to be symmetrical. Now that we have that cut, I'm going to go ahead, clean that off, push that out of the way, and now it's time to move on and cut the legs. So the legs for our table are going to be 23 inches. So I take the square and mark out 23 inches for the first pair of legs on the door here, also making sure that I'm clearing that hardware that we want to keep in and incorporate in the door. So once that end is marked, I'm going to go ahead and we will cut that piece. Then I need to mark another 23 inches from the other end so our legs are even, and that leaves us with about this 8-inch end piece that's scrap. And here we have our 3 main components for our table. Now it's going to start being time to prepare these pieces and sanding them down. If you don't have an electric sander, yes, you can get sanding blocks like this. It's good to start with a lower grit that's going to be rougher and get the heavy old layer of stuff out, as well to get rid of burrs and rough edges here. Now, this is something you can do this way, but it's not too realistic, especially if you have your own sander, which I do. So to make sure that we're clear to use that, I'm going to go ahead and take off all of the hardware for the door. We're going to go take those pieces off. We're going to put that off to the side so that we don't lose anything and clean them up so that we can reincorporate them back into the piece. Now, once the piece is off, I can take my sander again and begin sanding over the whole door, making sure I'm getting all the trim off the edges. Another thing you can do, the electric sander is great for, is cleaning up the edges and rounding them off. If it's an old door like this, it probably has chips. It's been banged into some point over the last 50 or to 100 years, however old your door is. So that orbital sander does a nice job of smoothing out, rounding the corners. So if you kick the table, run into it with the clothes, you're not going to pull them. Then I'm going to take the sanding block and we're going to get into the edges. Next, it's time you're ready for your drill, some pocket hole screws, wood glue, and wood filler, as well as bits for the drill here. Now we're going to use pocket hole screws, which what you do is you take a drill bit slightly larger than the head of the screw itself and drill a little channel partway into the wood that the head of the screw will essentially hide into. Then we're going to take our wood filler later and hide those. So I mark along where we are going to put our pocket screws for this design. I decided that I was going to do 5 going from the top down from the table into each of the legs. The reason that I'm not worrying too much about these being right on top is, again, we're going to use that wood filler later and hide that. So before I connect the first 2 pieces to help give it some extra bond, we're going to use that wood glue on the crease there, and then we're going to follow that little channel we made with our pocket screw and begin to screw in the top of the door to the first leg. Once those are in and secure, I can prop that up, bring over my second table leg, and line this up to be screwed in. We're going to go ahead and take our wood glue again and go ahead and line that up, then take our drill and put in our pocket hole screw. You can see how the head of the screw goes right into the channel. And now our primary structure for our dog bed, coffee table, side table, whatever you want to call it, is starting to come to form. Now, I mentioned taking that wood filler before. There's only a couple dollars. You can get this pre-mixed tube that's ready to go. And it's as simple as just filling in the hole, dabbing over it with your finger, and smoothing it out. And then we need to allow some time for that to dry, of course, so we can sand it smooth later. Now, to start working on the other pieces like the threshold of the door, I'm going to go ahead and measure that amount of opening, which comes to be 25 inches. I just decided to buy this 8-inch wide piece of pine board here, so I mark 25 inches, and I make my first cut. But I decide that I want it to be a little thicker, so I take my cutoff board, mark a second piece the same exact length, and cut that. And I'm actually going to combine those to use as a threshold. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the wood glue here. I decided that I'm going to bond them together, stick them together, make sure it's pressed nice and tight. And now I'm going to set that off to the side to give it some dry time. Now, if you remember when we were cutting the legs back here, I ended up with about this 8-inch cutoff scrap from the end. Originally, I was going to toss this piece away, and it was actually in my junk pile, but I actually decided for the back side of the door that I actually wanted to use that as part of the containment for it. So I go ahead and I take my drill again, make some new pocket holes, drill and line up and connect that back bottom piece. Now I go ahead and take the little bit of wood filler I have left, and I do the same thing with the pocket holes. Now, our threshold piece that we set aside earlier is dried and is usable. So, doing the same thing, I take those drill bits, I screw in the pocket holes where I want to put them, and go ahead and we fill in the holes. Now, by the time that the wood filler dries, you can take one of your sanding blocks and lightly sand it down smooth until it gets a nice flush finish and you can't really feel the difference. Also, walk along the edges of the table. If you feel any spots that you missed, anything that's sharp or feels rough that you want to smooth out, now is the perfect time to do that. Next, we are ready to prep our table. For us, we just grabbed a can of mineral spirits and a rag. Notice that before I started cleaning it and prepping it, I did put a piece of plastic under it, and I'm finishing taking off these door hinges. The door hinges weren't really in the way of sanding before, so I didn't touch them, but for the preparation they are. So I'm going to go ahead and start rubbing down the table, cleaning it off and prepping it. Now, our table's prepped. You can see though that it has a wet look. After sanding down the table, it was very dried out and absorbent. So what we need to do is we need to go and give it some time. So we've given the door time to dry. We're going to take our white wood stain, shake it up, and start to apply the first coat. Now in this case, the pigment from the original stain actually turned it kind of red. So what we decided to do is do multiple layers. After about 3 coats of layers, I got this nice white look. And after it was dry, I decided to move it into the house. And really the only reason I moved it into the house was because the weather, it was windy, there was leaves blowing around, there was a threat of rain. And now that the stain was done, the stain makes a bigger mess, but now I was going to go to paint, and that's a little bit cleaner. So I decided I could finish this up inside the house. Here you don't really get a good view, but I take my paintbrush and I cut in and I take a gray paint, and I actually do this paint to match the paint in our house, because in our house we have gray walls and white trim, and I thought if my goal is to make a miniature version of our house for the dog, that's what we do. So next I'll take the polyurethane that we're going to use as a protective coat, and before I can put that on, however, I need to clean the paint out of the brush. Make sure it's very clean. Make sure you dry it off good so you're not mixing different types of chemicals and paints. And then you can begin applying. And still applying nice and thoroughly. And it is no problem to do multiple coats on this. Polyurethane dries pretty quick, so in my case I left only about 30 minutes in between the coats, and what I ended up doing was doing about 3 coats on the top, 2 coats on the sides. Now, after that's dry, it's time that you can start reconnecting some of the hardware. So as you see, I'm putting back on the door hinges that I set aside before. I purposely designed and laid it out so they're all right in front and visible. Can reinstall the initial lock mechanism that we had on the door and all the hardware that goes along with that. Now our table is almost done. Our hardware is back together. Our handles are working. It is nice and painted. It is time to start decorating it. So I take my handy dandy glue gun. I take some pictures of the dog's friends, because which dog wouldn't want pictures of their friends inside of their home? Go and attach a couple other little signs that we made, and voila.